what are the technical issues to think about before you're doing an online Celta?
Yeah, okay. I mean, you need to be familiar with the platforms we're using on the course, basically. And the two main platforms are Zoom and Google. In terms of Zoom, if you haven't, as a teacher or even as a member of the general public, used Zoom before, you really need, before the course starts, to familiarize yourself with Zoom. How can you do that? Well, first of all, make sure that you download Zoom and make yourself a Zoom account, and practice. Have a look at Zoom, play around with it a little bit, maybe use it with your family or colleagues so that you can actually practice using the features. The main features for you to think about that you will need on the course are, one, how to set up breakout rooms. So how you can send students to separate rooms to work in pairs or in groups. Those are called breakout rooms on Zoom, and you need to know how you set up breakout rooms. You need to know how to share the screen so that you can show pictures, or you can show a PowerPoint presentation or whatever when you're teaching. How you share sound, because again, the sound is not always very good quality unless you make sure that you have specifically said that you want to share sound. And another feature of Zoom that you really need to be sure you're familiar with is the chat box and how the chat box works. Because again, you can use that with your students to get answers to questions, or get them to complete an exercise and send you the answer in the chat box. So basically, you need to know how to use breakout rooms, how to share the screen, how to share sound, and how to use the chat box, and any other features you fancy. There are lots of useful videos on YouTube that you can look at. Russell Stannard in particular has some very useful videos on YouTube about how to use Zoom, lots and lots of them. So have a look at some of those if you're not familiar, and they will be very, very helpful actually. So yeah, I mean, Zoom, you need to be familiar with Zoom, and Google. Do you want to talk about Google, Amanda?
Okay, all right. So we use Google Classroom as our main platform through which we share information with you. It's not such a big deal if you're not particularly familiar with Google Classroom. It's before the course starts, but it is useful if you are familiar with Google Drive and how Google Drive works, and also Google Documents, because sometimes we'll ask you to share Google Documents, or we'll share Google Documents with you. So if you know kind of how those work and how to set them up, that would be useful. And also like other features of the Google suite. So for example, Google Forms maybe is something to have a look at. You might want to, as part of one of your lessons, use a Google form with the students. And of course, you can just share the links with them through the chat box. Another useful feature of Google is Google Jamboard, which is a way of sharing different, you can share text, you can share pictures, and you can have multiple screens within Jamboard. So you might want to get students, for example, working on different screens. So if you're familiar with some of these features of Google, also that will make your life a little bit easier on the course. Because what's important on the Celta is that we're teaching you how to be teachers. We're not teaching you how to use Zoom and Google. We're kind of expecting that you've got some of that know-how already. Of course, it will improve a lot as you go through the course. But if you've got a heads up and you've got some familiarity with Zoom and with Google, the features of Google, it will help you a lot on the course.
Is it worth saying also that it's a good idea to have a Gmail account, because
absolutely, yeah.
Some people had problems with Hotmail and Yahoo and things like that.
Yeah. I think even though Google Classroom will allow us to use other email addresses, of course it likes Gmail. So yeah, if you set up a Gmail account before the course, then it'll just make everything much easier. Yeah.
The other technical thing to think about is the practical technical considerations. So you do need to have, you need to work on the course through a laptop, at least. It could be a desktop, but most people, I think, have laptops nowadays. So you need a laptop. You can't do the course or participate through a phone. In theory, you could through a tablet, but it's more difficult and not advisable. So really, you need to make sure you have a laptop to participate, and you need essentially to have a good internet connection, obviously. Yeah, you need to
We're smiling when we say that, but yes.
Yeah, sometimes we don't always have our internet connections, so we're a bit unreliable. So you need to make sure you've got a good internet connection, and you need to make sure you have backup, because life being what it is, the internet, the Wi-Fi can go off, the electricity can go off at the least opportune moment, and has done with me as well. So you need to make sure you have a data package, a good data package on your phone, which you can then tether your laptop to should you have a problem with the Wi-Fi or a problem with your electricity. And then the other issue, of course, is kind of hedging into the more practical considerations, but you could consider headphones. Mukhtar, you're wearing headphones at the moment. The headphones reduce the noise around you, so to a certain extent. So if you're in a noisy environment, i.e. you've got traffic outside your window, or you know, various
children running around.
Yeah, well, we talk about children in a moment, but yeah, or a cat.
Or cats.
It reduces the background sound to a certain extent. So you could consider headphones. I personally don't use them, but I'm in a fairly quiet environment. So yeah, I think those are the main technical things to think about, really. Anything to add on that?
I don't think so. I think you've covered everything.